Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's public hearing. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, do you mind calling the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rob Rennie.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Mariko Sayak.
Here. Before we begin every meeting, we invite a young student from our community to come forward so that we have the pleasure of introducing her to our community. And today I'm excited to introduce to all of you Haley Clausey, and I'm going to ask her to come join me. Stand right next to me. So some of you may actually recognize her because she is one of our great athletes and actresses of the community. So Haley has been quite active with the Los Gatos Youth Theater, Children's Musical Theater, and she's been in plays since kindergarten. That's pretty impressive. So it says here that she's been in several commercials and worked for companies like Apple and McGraw-Hill, and she's also been in several films. This past summer, she traveled to LA to work with director Francis Ford Coppola on his latest project. And hopefully we'll get a sneak preview of that. Yeah. Okay. But in addition to being an actress, she also is on the Junior Guards lifeguarding competition. And she is with the lacrosse team, the Red Hawks. And in addition to all that, to keep her even more busy, she's part of the leadership program at Fisher Middle School, where she welcomes incoming students. She's a youth mentor, and she also teaches kids how to code. She at Coder Dojo. She volunteers her time helping kids learn coding programs like Scratch. And I think I'm one of those that actually might need to learn what Scratch is. So she's just one of our well-rounded young individuals that I'm so proud to introduce to all of you. And today she is going to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you again. Haley. Okay, so another fun thing that we do at the end of each month is we award a local business under a program that we call Small Business Big Applause. And this was created 2 years ago by Councilmember Leonardis to highlight some of the amazing businesses we have in town that are unique to our community. And this month, our recipient is Black Hats. So, come on up. Black Cat, I'm sorry, I need to clarify that. Black Cat Hats. And if you've never been there, this is one of the funnest stores in town to try on hats, not only for fun parties like Kentucky Derby, which I was going to show you the picture, the big hat I bought. But it's also a place where many people who have recently suffered chemo and had hair loss go to. And the number of times I have been there with friends and family and seen the smile on their faces when they put on a hat or a scarf that helps them feel the beauty that they have that may have dissipated with the treatment. It's just something that your store cannot. It's priceless. So thank you for providing that. I do want to share quickly some of the things that we put in this commendation. So that is there. And Black Cat Hats makes it a priority to offer hats and accessories for all by creating a fun and unique shopping experience for customers with expert service on fit, style, and product on an assortment of trend and affordable products. Black Cat Hat supports local nonprofits such as Witchy Women, is it Valley?
Valamonte.
Valamonte, Carolyn's Kids and other charitable efforts through event participation and donation. And it's just, again, one of those fun stores. You walk in and you immediately feel happy that you're there. So thank you for being in our community, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, yeah, hi, I'm Aileen Larson, and I'm the owner of Black Cat Hats. And this is Melissa Allgood, who's my right hand. So when I'm not at the shop, she's there taking care of things. And she's incredible with fit. She's incredible with fashion and style. And she's also very, very patient. We all need that a little bit in retail. I do want to introduce my yummy kids, Charles Larson. You can come up, baby. Yes, and Henry Larson. These are my two boys who they spend a lot of time at the shop when I'm working, so I really appreciate all of their effort and hard work when they're there too. And again, thank you to the community as well, and thank you for honoring me. I'm blown away. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Schultz, closed session report.
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss real property negotiations. The real property negotiations was the New Moo lease, and no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
And council members, any reports to share with the other council members since our last public hearing? Council member Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Sayak. Since our last meeting, I attended the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors meeting on Wednesday, May 10th. It was a general business meeting, primarily made up of one closed session item. I also chaired our Finance Committee meeting on May 4th, and we discussed some items related to the 115 pension trusts.
Councilmember Johnson?
I have nothing to report.
Okay. Since our last public hearing, I'm happy to announce that Vice Mayor Rennie and I were at the U.S. Service Academy reception. We have two of our own youth going on to a service academy, one going to Annapolis and one going to West Point, and we were there to thank them for their upcoming service. In addition to that, we had our Leadership Los Gatos graduation ceremony. And there was a Cities Association meeting, both the Legislative Advisory and a general membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So May 4th, I also attended the Finance Committee meeting. On May 5th, I attended the Business of Local Energy Symposium in Long Beach. That was an all-day long thing. Some of the items discussed was there were many things of interest. One was the president of the PUC discussion between him and the CEO of Sonoma CCA, which is like our Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority. On 5/8, I attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Risk Oversight Committee, where we basically reviewed the results of our power purchase and positions for the first month in operation. It's in addition to what the mayor said on the U.S. Service Academy. Also on 5/9, I interviewed 37 youth commissioners with the mayor for 19 spots. We had a lot of very qualified youth commissioners, and it was a very difficult decision with the police chief and the mayor and I, and we made it through. And we're going to have a very good youth commission. On 5/10, I chaired the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board. I guess my biggest accomplishment is managed to lead a 12-member board through closed session of the CEO's first year review and settle on compensation changes. On 5/11, I attended the VTA Policy Advisory Committee. The big discussion there was about fare increases and fare structure changes, especially as it pertained to students. On 5/11, I also was at the Cities Association general membership with the mayor and the town manager were there. 5/12, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy had a legislative workshop where we basically focused on giving staff direction on how to take positions on bills in the legislature without having to come back to us for permission. On 5/12, I also met with Assemblyman Lowe to raise his awareness of Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority and CCAs in general, community choice aggregators. And today, I also attended the Housing for the Middle put on by Mountain View, which was a discussion of the need for housing for middle between the affordable and the luxury that usually get built. That's all for my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since our last council meeting, I also attended Leadership Los Gatos and represented the town of Los Gatos on the West Valley Solid Waste Authority, which at that meeting was focusing on its budget for the coming year.
Thank you. Madam Manager.
Thank you. I have 3 items to report. First, I would like to introduce you to Arn Andrews, our new Assistant Town Manager. Welcome, Arn. Second, on Saturday, I'd like to invite all of you to Big Truck Day. It will be at right outside the library at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll have lots of different vehicles, town vehicles and fire trucks as well. And that will be the kickoff to our summer reading program. And the theme this year is Build a Better World. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we have 6 items on our consent agenda, and nothing has been pulled from our council members. I see no one from the audience. Look, actually, would you like to pull something? Okay. If you can include one, send the card, and then which item would you like to pull? If you could just tell me which agenda item. Number 4. Okay. And so I see no other items that are looking to be pulled. So can I have a motion on the remaining consent agenda items? So, Councilmember Jensen.
I move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 6, now exclusive of 4.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And that passes unanimously. Okay. And so, Director Conway, welcome. Okay, so let's move into item number 4, which has just been pulled, auditing services.
Very briefly, the town about a month and a half ago issued an RFP, a request for proposal for audit services. We had 11 firms, qualified firms respond, 6 of which we, through just qualifications, got down to six firms that we looked at more closely, and then we eventually, through our procedure of scoring, we got down to the top 3, which we invited to interviews here at the town, where they presented their proposal to staff, including members of the finance department and also the interim assistant town manager. Badawi and Associates was selected through that process. They're very qualified. I think they have approximately 25 California cities that they currently audit. We know them and familiar with them because they speak at a lot of training seminars and events from the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. Very impressed with their principal, Ahmed Badawi, who is a CPA, worked for either a Big 4 or a Big 6 firm, has many years of local government experience, and he and his firm were very professional, and we think they'll do a great job for the town, and we're recommending Badawi and Associates.
Thank you, Director Conway. Council members, any questions of staff? Okay. Seeing none, I'll open for public testimony. And if you could introduce yourself, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
I'm Phil Keown.
If you could raise the microphone, please.
Sure. My issue is not around the recommendation. My issue is around the process. In reading the staff memo, I don't believe that the Finance Committee, which is newly constituted with members of the public, were involved in this. If you read the charter of the Finance Committee, one of the number 1 things is the selection of the auditor and oversight of the annual audit. So I find it a little bit mystifying how we could go through this process and the Finance Committee not be involved at all. My recommendation is to remand this back to the Finance Committee, have them interview the top 3 firms, and come back with a firm recommendation to council to be able to move forward. I don't think it's appropriate for staff to make a recommendation on the firm that is going to be auditing their work. That's the reason why we have a Finance Committee.
Any questions? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak on this subject? Seeing none, I will close public testimony, bring it back to council members for any questions of staff, any comments, and/or a motion. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the testimony we've had, the question would be of staff. What is staff's response to the suggestion that the Finance Committee be involved in the selection?
Thank you. As you recall, we just added 3 resident members to our Council Finance Committee. At the time in March, Council adopted a resolution which identified the scope of the Council Finance Committee. It is limited to addressing the pension and unfunded liabilities as well as our investment policy. So it has a very narrow scope, and I'm in the process of pulling up that resolution if there are more detailed questions.
Any further questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I appreciate the response from the town manager, but I think in the past, I understand Mr. Kewen's comment that the Finance Committee usually oversees the CAFR. Now we're talking about, and she just read a description that didn't include overseeing the CAFR. So that, I guess the question is then, is the Finance Committee no longer going to oversee the CAFR, or are we going to have a different Finance Committee for overseeing the CAFR? Because the comment by Mr. Kewen is really connected to that. My question's maybe not very well worded, but
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply that we were taking away the CAFR, because that has been a critical, long-standing element of the Finance Committee's work. However, with the council's increased attention to our unfunded liabilities, the Council Finance Committee is well positioned to advise the full council on some options regarding those unfunded liabilities. So the CAFR remains, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report remains a key responsibility for review and recommendation to the council.
Councilmember Johnson.
It's a follow-up on the resolution that you were reading to us, or at least a portion of it. Is that relating to the council's decision to expand the scope of the Finance Committee to include the citizens as an advisory body to the council, and not advising potentially on OPEB and CalPERS, not particularly on hiring decisions, is my one question.
Yes.
And my second question is, I'm still trying to get this, but I know that there are certain circumstances where, by law, the council is required to award a contract to a low bidder, and I'm thinking that that's construction, not necessarily this. Can somebody remind me where that divide happens?
Correct. That would only be in a public works contract where you have to bid to the lowest responsible bidder. In this case, since it's professional services, you don't. You actually should base it on qualifications and not on the actual price.
Okay, so in our staff report, we got that there was an initial evaluation without the bid price that reduced the number of people to the qualified people. Then you opened the bid price and selected the person that you're recommending to us tonight, correct? Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Vice Mayor?
sorry if I can word one better. So are there other examples? So obviously we haven't had the Finance Committee involved in the auditor choice in the past. Do you know if other towns or other government jurisdictions have somebody other than sort of the head of the finance involved?
We did have in regards to a public comment about this, we just did a survey with our California Society of Municipal Finance Officers regarding this kind of a situation where someone would say with the Finance Committee, of the 25 cities that responded, 20 said members of the Finance Department and City Manager's Office selected the auditor, 20 out of 25. 2 used a finance or audit committee, but they were very large. One was a very large water district in Southern California, which had a formal audit division or department, and the other one was a very large city. So all the medium and smaller cities just use professional judgment. And want to remind everybody that any of these 6 firms that we interviewed have to be fully independent of the town. They can't bid under audit standards. They cannot bid and do our audit unless they're fully independent. It means they are not related to any members of staff, have no financial interest with the town. So we made this based purely on qualifications and their experience.
I do have the enabling resolution, and no, it's not one of their functions to review and select the auditor of the town. That's not one of them. There's 1 through 5, and that's not listed as one of their functions.
Okay. And Director Conway, could you just walk me through the process once an auditor is selected, regardless of whether it's interviewed by a larger committee or the interviews that have already taken place? We award this contract. The auditor will then begin its work by a certain time frame.
Yes, we would like to get them in June as soon as possible so they can start doing their interim work.
And in the prior to beginning work, does the auditor have an opportunity to meet with various people on staff?
Yes, staff, plus also they will have what's called initial audit communication with all of the council and the city or town manager.
And those initial communications, are those something that the council has, let me take you where I'm going. If there's an opportunity for the new auditor to meet with the council, with the finance committee, the larger finance committee, is that an opportunity that this council can say, make it happen?
One of the questions we asked each of the firms is do they have staff time, and will they commit to being available to the finance committee? And I believe we requested that they be available at least 3 times a year, and all the firms that did submit a proposal said they would agree to that.
Okay, and
So,
that
yes.
includes the time prior to actually beginning any audit work?
Yes.
Okay. Any further questions of council members? Okay. And anyone venture to a motion? Yes, Councilmember Johnson.
I would move that we accept the staff's recommendation and approve the contract award to Badawi and Associates. They appear to be, based on our staff report, fully qualified to do the job and have actually experience in municipalities, large ones, for example, Berkeley. So there's no question but that they're qualified, and they are committed to meeting with the Finance Committee. So my motion is to accept that recommendation and award the contract.
Okay. I'll second the motion. Just quick question of the maker of the motion. Is that specific guidance that the auditor meet with the Finance Committee prior to any work?
No, it's my understanding that from Mr. Conway, that they're committed to at least three meetings. Obviously, they're going to have to meet to report the results or the progress of their audit. I expect that that's going to be done in the course of that work. And so if it's to be included in the contract, fine, but I don't know that we need to tell them independently of that.
Okay.
That's our understanding.
That's your understanding as well? Okay, I'll second the motion. Any specific questions or comments to the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, and we are now at verbal communications. And I have one speaker card, and that is Miss Angelia Dortner.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. I just have a couple of quick items that I'd like to mention. 2 meetings ago at the Planning Commission meeting, the Shelbourne-Winchester project for 33,000 square feet of office space was denied. I understand that there's an appeal that's going to be coming to you on August 15th. Then again, last week, the Alberta Way and Highway 9 project was also denied, and I'm assuming that appeal will be coming to you as well. I want to applaud all of the residents who participated in those hearings because they were very professional, analytical, provided unbelievable substantive materials and information, and I just think that they should be acknowledged. Last month, in connection with these projects, several PC members specifically requested a joint Town Council Planning Commission study session regarding the gateway corridors, what I call Town Central, because there are so many projects that are going on right now through this process that are going to be impacting the key intersections of, I call Town Central. Also to look at the cumulative traffic and other impacts of so many projects, but also to come up with some specificity as to preservation of the hillside views, because no one wants another Chipotle. I also I think this is a great idea. The one that you guys did for the appeal process, I think, was extremely informative and helpful to the residents that were here, even though it was under-attended, but also to, I think, all of you and the commissioners. And so I would request that there be an extended public notice if this is done for a joint session with adequate notification to the public, because I know there's a lot of residents that would like to participate. The other thing is that at the last meeting, with the PG&E item, I guess their list of trees that they're taking away are finally done. So we're not anticipating any other huge lists of 30, 40, 50 trees being removed. But I did want to ask that now, since the drought is officially over, that if possible, that PPW can look at some of the trees in the almond grove that have been marked for removal, because their full foliage is much different than what they looked like a year ago after the drought. And since we've had all this great rain, maybe there's a few more that can be saved, as well as just take a good look at trees that are being asked for removal. And the last point that I'd like to say is that I found out today that CB Hannigan's will continue to be open until at least the end of the summer. And so let's just be happy about that. And I know there's a lot of families, generations of families that will be happy about that. And hopefully something will be worked out that they can stay even longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on verbal communications? Okay, seeing none, we now move to our public hearing. We have one item on our public hearing. It's our operating and capital budget. And so for those of you who are in attendance, I welcome your participation, and really just want to highlight to everyone that if there is one document you can read this year, it really is the operating budget, because it's so much more than just a reflection of our financial health. It really gives a snapshot on how the council and the staff view how to progress for the next 1 to 5 years. And it provides a summary of the daily activities and services that your staff provide to residents on a daily service, as well as the upcoming strategic priorities that have been approved and that were discussed in January. And so I will turn to our town manager to walk us through on the process. But again, I want to everyone to understand that the budget really is a reflection on the priorities that we approved in January, and should be a document that all of you feel comfortable in raising and discussing tonight if you so choose. So, Town Manager?
Yes, thank you very much. It's my honor to present to you the proposed budget for our fiscal year 17-18 starting July 1st. We have a operating and capital budget for your consideration, as well as the 5-year capital improvement program. As the mayor stated, our budget is a reflection of the services that your staff work very hard to provide to all residents and businesses. And they focus around the core goals that the council reaffirmed in its study session back in January of 2017. These very quickly are good governance, which means that we operate under the best practices and procedures to ensure fiscal responsibility and good government practices for our community. Community character is a second goal. This is essentially around our wonderful environment and historic preservation, our beautiful buildings, and we want to make sure that as new development happens, that it's done in a way that is seamless with the rest of our beautiful community. Quality public infrastructure means that we care for the quality of our streets, of our roads, of our urban forest, and we want to make sure that the resources that people need for their daily lives are available. Fourth, public safety. We pride ourselves on quality community policing, and this is key that we have good public safety in our schools as well as in our neighborhoods. Civic enrichment reflects the community engagement that happens through our boards, committees, and commissions, and we're really looking at how we can advance and extend engagement in all of our town processes. And fiscal stability is really key. We really work hard to make sure that we live within our means, that we're able to provide services within our budget, and oftentimes we are actually able to save money. And the ability to meet all of these core goals and provide high quality services depends on the staff. So we're really a people-driven business. So when you see in the budget the salaries and the benefits, that really reflects our ability to retain high quality staff to deliver these services. The strategic priorities that the mayor mentioned were identified and back in the January timeframe. There are many of them. Some of them are reflected on the slide. You have an exhibit in your budget book that goes into all of them. A few of the key priorities, some of them are capital projects, such as the Almond Grove. Some of them have been completed, such as the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan, and now we're ready to implement with specific proposals for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. We're also working to address downtown parking through the garage projects. We're also looking at how we can best position the town to receive our fair share of the Measure B monies. And as the mayor said, these strategic priorities inform the development of the budget and the recommendations that are here, and they also align with the work for our boards, committees, and commissions. The key principles that guide the preparation of the budget is that we must have a balanced budget, and we want to make sure that we're able to maintain the high quality of service levels that we are offering to our community. And for that reason, this is really a status quo budget. There are very few ads in the proposed budget, and we're available to discuss those in more detail. We also want to continue to make progress on your strategic priorities. And third, continue to identify opportunities to really improve our service delivery to the neighborhoods through technology as well as through transparent, open government. And with that, I will turn it over to Director Conway, who will go into the detail of the proposed budget.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Sack and members of council. Steve Conway, Director of Finance. My pleasure tonight to present to you the proposed fiscal year 17-18 budget. I'm happy to also say that it's a balanced budget, and that's our goal every year. And I can say that the years I've been director, 15 years or so, we've always had a balanced budget, and our streak is kept intact. We have a nice balanced budget here to present tonight. We do use some money for one-time use from our reserves, but that's strictly for one-time use. The operating budget revenues equal the operating budget expenditures. Moving ahead to our general fund revenues, this year's budget does include expected increases, I'm pleased to announce, in our property tax is still continuing strong. Our transient occupancy tax, which is our motel tax, also strong. Business licenses tax is also coming in stronger than we had estimated, along with the franchise fees. These at least the three, transit occupancy tax, business license, and franchise fees, they're very reliant on the economy. Economy has been fairly robust in recent years, so we've seen an increase across all of those areas. And then the property tax is mostly attributable to the fact that the town still remains a very wonderful community with has maintained its property values. And we meet quarterly with the county, and we're using the county's estimate, Santa Clara County's estimate in this recommended budget for the increase in our property tax. We do have one small piece of bad news is our sales tax. We do expect a decrease in sales tax. This is largely the result of Netflix. The change in business model, we are seeing a very slow and steady decline in that as more and more of the people leave the DVD part of the membership, which is taxable to all internet, and that is non-taxable. So we're seeing a gradual decrease in that. And then we've had some across the board decreases, mostly in our top 20, we have a number of gas stations. So as people are well aware, the price of gas in the recent past has tended on the lower side, and so that affects our sales tax. So we do expect a decrease in our property taxes. On the expenditure side, we have very limited, we mentioned, as the town manager said, the budget before you tonight is largely a status quo budget, really no change in services. There are some increases, however, that we had to build in, and those related to what we term non-discretionary or contractual obligations, such as salary and benefits through negotiations. Also, the CalPERS employer contribution we're required to make, and our OPEB contribution, We also have mandated increases. These are either federal or state law that affect the town, and we have to fund those. So examples that come to mind are urban runoff. We had a utility rate on our water increase because of the recent drought. We've had OSHA mandates. Gas masks are now required for some of our crews in PD and Public Works. Those all had to be purchased. And then we had one-time use money in this budget. Some of the things that came to my mind were the street tree trimming contract was increased. We had a backlog there, and we also have increased our library collections, and we've increased some temporary support in Parks and Public Works for some of the summer activities, including the construction and various things that are very heavy in the summer, so we've used some one-time money for that. Moving into our five-year plan, you can see that we have some good news. We're predicting a $2.1 million revenue above expenditure surplus for this fiscal year. That's good news. That money, of course, at year end, after we do all our close through our audit, we will then put that money in its appointed reserves. Hopefully a large amount of that will flow into our capital program. For next year, we're showing a balanced budget, so we don't show a revenue shortfall or a decrease. But in the out years 2, 3, 4, and 5, we do show small deficits. I want to point out that those out years also include the employer rate increases as a result of CalPERS lowering its discount rate from 7.5% down to 7% over a period of time. Those have been built in. Also like to point out that on these out years, these levels of revenue shortfall, first of all, one thing is that our revenue estimates at finance, we tend to be a little conservative because we just don't know the future, so we're fairly conservative on our revenue side. But on the expenditure side, the increases across the board, we think we've got those fairly well quantified, and we also believe that we can adjust the budget to meet these. We've had past experience where the town had to make a $500,000 or $600,000 or even a $700,000 revenue shortfall, and we've had to adjust services to reach that goal. And we have done it as a town, as an organization. We have been able to do that, and I would expect that in the future we would be able to do that, although it does get tougher each year because we've had to adjust our service levels. But I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility that we could adjust through our budget process. The other thing is the revenue picture may improve beyond our estimates. Or number 3, we may, if the stars align, find a new revenue source to help fund some of our capital and other operations. I wanted to touch real briefly on our OPEB liability and our pension liability. We reported these numbers out at mid-year, but just in case we have a new audience tonight, we do have a unfunded liability of approximately $53 million, including our OPEB and pension. Council will remember we actually are going to make a $1 million payment on OPEB this year, so I would expect that number that you see for OPEB will drop approximately $1 million. So that's good news. We're making headway, and we also have in the budget tonight another $1 million proposed towards either the pension or OPEB, depending on the Finance Committee's review and recommendation to the full council. So that's in the upcoming, that's also, that $1 million is right now in the proposed budget. This was once again another one that we had at mid-year, but you can see the town of Los Gatos is the middle bar. These are the total unfunded liabilities with some of our comparison neighbors. Campbell is slightly higher than the town in terms of their pension liability. We have Morgan Hill slightly below us. Los Altos has a younger workforce and they are the lowest in our survey. We took this from CalPERS, and of course Gilroy, who has their own fire department, leads our Santa Clara County, similar medium-sized cities that we were able to obtain this information. So that was to give us a perspective, because we wanted to see how do we rank. The green bar in the middle is the national average in terms of funded percentage of funded ratio, it's called. That's your assets as a percentage of what you think you'll pay out to pensioners. The national average right now is 72.5%. The state average right now, I just determined this morning, is 73.5%. We're ahead of the state average in terms of our funded ratio for public safety, which is at 78% in our safety plan, and we're slightly behind in our, or right at the average for our miscellaneous plan. So we are trending very comparably with our brethren across the state. Just that was more informational, just so we can see ourselves in terms of how we're stacking up health-wise. I do want to also point out, this was an interesting slide. We lead the town as a leader in terms of addressing OPEB. The very large bar on the left, out of 200 California cities surveyed recently, nearly 100 of them, almost half of them, had no money set aside for OPEB. The town of Los Gatos has approximately $11 million to $12 million in a trust set aside for OPEB, which puts us in a very high percentage of very forward-thinking cities and towns that have actually addressed this issue, gone forward, been proactive, set aside assets, and I expect with this $1 million we'll be over a 50% funding, and we're trending, and we'll be making more advances in that area in future years. Excuse me. So what have we done? Wrap it up real quickly. What have we done in terms of unfunded pensions and also our OPEB liabilities? In 2009, as I mentioned, the town immediately, once GASB 45 came in, established an OPEB trust and began pre-funding those amounts and set aside dollars to address this obligation. In 2015, the council wisely paid off the entire side fund. It was a pension fund that was costing the town a significant amount of money, and that was completely paid off. In 2016, the town council established a CalPERS OPEB reserve. Right now, we're anticipating that balance at $1.9 million. $300,000 minimum per year, and we also had some money saved from last year that we were able to put in that. So we've got a $1.9 billion amount set aside for that. And as I mentioned, that is also what council recommended from 16-17. That was done from the prior year's savings, and we're proposing another $1 million from this year's savings that we anticipate, or from prior year's savings that we would like to dedicate towards this liability. We also, as has been pointed out, have a new finance committee. One of their charter and primary goals is to develop strategies to address over the long term our pension and OPEB liabilities. And so we think we've made some great strides. We're very confident we can manage this over time, and that's all I have to say on that. I kind of sound like a famous movie star. Anyway, I'd like to turn it over to our Parks and Public Works Director, Matt Morley, to talk about our capital program.
You could be a famous movie star. We'll talk a little bit about our CIP development process and how we go about setting our CIP. In January, as you all know, we did our council core goals and strategy priority setting session where you provided direction to staff on what was important to you. We've incorporated into our CIP current and scheduled projects that are on the books, and matched our priorities with our existing resources so that we're sure that we can deliver projects to you. We also review our projects with various commissions, including the Transportation and Parking Commission and the BPAC, the Parks Commission, and the Planning Commission, who reviews the proposed CIP for compliance with the general plan. I'll take you through a little bit of a funding overview, and then I want to dive into some of the details on some of the items that we've had conversations on over the last several months in terms of capital projects and program delivery. So we'll start with a high-level funding overview. Our 5-year CIP totals $45 million, with a fiscal year 2017-18 proposed CIP of $25.4 million. This includes a $21 million carry forward from previous years and previous projects and additional funding of about $4 million. Our CIP is made of several funding sources, predominantly, as you can see, by GFAR. GFAR includes our year-end fund balance as well as other funds such as taxes that come in for specific purposes over the course of the year. And of course, we want to push more. We're looking to push more of our revenue for our CIP down into the bottom line on the grants category. So we're hoping to be able to do that through Measure B over the next several years. So getting into the details, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we create a capital project and where the capital projects come from. So the projects, as you know, start as a concept, and these projects come to us sometimes fairly well developed and sometimes with a little bit of work to be done on them. One example of this has been the Little League backstop that we just recently built at Blossom Hill Park. That project came to us a little over a year ago about this time as a project that Little League wanted to partner with us on. They contributed some funds, and the town contributed some funds as well. So we had a rough scope. We wanted to build the backstop, and we had a rough estimate of the costs on that one. As we got to the next stage and refined the scope, we found on that particular project that we needed some additional scope on the project. So the backstop that we had envisioned wasn't going to meet the needs in terms of the scale and the seismic and wind load capacity of it. So we had to up the design to be able to accommodate. Our alternative was to scale down the project significantly to fit within the budget. So those are some of the considerations that we put into a project, whether the budget needs to increase or whether the scope needs to decrease. You can see at this particular stage that our cost estimates are in that 30 to 50% range, so still pretty wide in terms of how accurate they are. But then we take it to the next step, which begins the detailed estimates. So now we understand some of the components of the project and are able to really get into the details on the pricing. Switching projects and looking at street maintenance as a good example here, we're able to pull from other projects that are completed throughout the area, other cities, other jurisdictions that are completing projects, and see what pricing is looking at like. We're able to use our last year's prices, and we're able to have conversations with bidding contractors to identify what we would anticipate costs to be. So we're able to really refine the costs there and get it even closer. So we're in that 15 to 30% range as we're headed out to bid. And then ultimately we end up with a bid-supported costing, which is a result of our bid specifications and plans. And you can see that even at that point, as we're getting bids in, that our cost range can be the 10 to 15% difference. And a chart that you've seen before is this one, which tells the same story, that as we get more and more refined on the scope of the project and closer to that bid stage of the project, we get better and better at identifying the cost of the project. Keep in mind that as we complete a project that we have the potential for change orders or for coming in under budget on a project, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So I wanted to go through a little bit of what happens if you approve the CIP as it is before you and what happens with the projects. So we have a number of projects that are in the queue already from previous years, and those will continue. Big examples obviously include the Almond Grove and our street maintenance program that are underway now. And those are carried forward because they cross the fiscal year, so they're not started or finished in any one particular year, and we consider them ongoing projects. There's other projects that you may be approving tonight that we will, once approved, to begin the design on, and the design we will revert back to the previous slide where I talk about the evolution of the project. Ultimately, we end up with plans and specifications that we bring forward to the council for review and approval. And that moves us on to the ability to bid it and the authority to award. And as you know, sometimes we combine those two steps, primarily because the authority to award is a non-discretionary item and something that is pretty straightforward once you're comfortable with the project and the budget. Obviously, then we take the project to construction and build it, and that leads us to the closeout. Closeout's one of those sort of stealth steps in the project. It happens behind the scenes and takes oftentimes 3, 4, 5 months for us to finish a project as we're working through punch list items. We hang on to the retention for a contractor for a while and make sure that everything's done completely and that there's no claims on the project. We had a discussion earlier tonight about RFPs and what the criteria was for awarding an RFP. I wanted to go through just a quick summary of our types of contracts that you see at the council level. Materials contracts we bring forward to on a routine basis, maybe not as frequently, but some of the things you see there are large technology purchases or vehicle purchases, particularly where it's a very specific item that we're looking for. And we bid those, or we do an RFP for those, depending on what we're looking for. And so that's one of those areas that's either the flexible qualification space, the RFP, so we're looking for something that could meet our need, and the manufacturers would spec it for us, or it's very specific, in which case we'd get a bid and award to the low bid on that particular item. Service contracts are more the maintenance side that you would see in our operating budget, so things like landscaping and custodial. Again, this can be done through an RFP or through a cost-competitive low bid scenario. And then there's consultant contracts, which we use for things like the design or the financial services that you see coming forward. And as you know now, the consultant contracts are RFP, so they're qualifications-based. The price is an element, but the main determination needs to be on the qualifications of the proposer. And of course, we have construction contracts, which are always bids, and by California law are let to the lowest responsive bidder. So that is one where it's important that we have a tight specification and plans for our project so that we get the exact product that we want and can manage all kinds of contractors. There's a number of costs involved in a project. I've outlined a couple of them here. Wanted to point out that the staff costs begin early on in a project. So we at the very front end, as we're selecting a design consultant and doing design review, are spending a lot of time with projects to make sure that the town gets the best product possible. We spend a lot of time and have ramped up recently, as you know, in the public outreach and communication. So it's important that the community is informed, and we're working hard to make sure that that is the case. And throughout the project, it's important that we're there along for the project, making sure that the project delivery is important. One of the items that helps to see this is when we're doing a road construction project where some of the construction happens underneath the surface that you won't be able to see when the project is done. And it's important that the materials that are provided under the surface are meet the criteria that we specified for them. So they need to be inspected before they get covered up, before they become permanent in that situation. In Almond Grove, as every concrete truck came into the job site, they provided the inspector, the project manager, with a tag that showed when they left the concrete plant, and it was very important that they got there within the allotted amount of time so that the concrete was still the quality that we knew we were buying. And we also captured concrete out of that concrete truck into what we call cylinders that we set aside and allowed to cure much as right alongside the concrete that was curing in the field. That allows us to test that concrete to make sure that the concrete, as it gets solid, retains the strength that we're looking for. And it also allows us to test to see when we're able to allow traffic back onto the roadway. So you can see that project delivery inspection and that testing element are important to a project, to the ultimate project delivery. And of course, the construction and the project closeout that I left off of the list are important elements and very time-consuming. Town staff is along for this entire path, making sure that the town gets the best value, and the money that we're paying for the projects is worth the deliverable. Recently, we've made some changes in how we present information to the council, so I wanted to cover a little bit about that. In the name of accountability and transparency, we've been reflecting the staff costs within some of our projects. And this has been sort of one of those trial things that we run up the flagpole to see what the reaction is. So input from the council is obviously appreciated. We wanted to make sure that all of our projects reflect the actual project costs, so that you know that as we're incurring costs on a project, that those are out there and associated with a specific project. For project delivery, we're targeting that 8 to 12% range, so a very, very competitive percentage. You typically see project delivery costs higher in the 25% range, so we're really working hard to keep those costs in line. And as you see projects complete and report out, you'll be able to hold the town staff accountable for meeting those numbers, or we'll be able to provide explanations should we exceed them or should we come in under them. In terms of staff capacity within our operating budget, we do have staffing to deliver capital projects. In that program, we have 5.9 FTEs, 4 of which are dedicated to project delivery. We do see fluctuations in our construction timeline. So as you know, we're starting a whole bunch of projects right now with Almond Grove and our street projects. We also have a ton of utility companies who are delivering projects in the town right of way, all of which require management from our part to ensure that the product is appropriate for the town. When we look at the entire CIP and the workload in front of us, we do have more hours of projects than we have staff availability. So we have used temporary staffing to supplement that, and that's part of the project costs and part of the accountability that we want you to be aware of as we continue to move forward. So we bring part-time employees in to meet that, for instance, summer spike in workload, and the costs for those employees, because they're not in our operating budget, are attributed to the project specifically. Now moving into the fun part, the project highlights for the upcoming year, and leaving the processes and procedures. Wanted to capture some of the big ones, and of course you know that we're about to begin the Almond Grove project, the second phase, which will complete the streets in the Almond Grove. So we're excited to get that going and working hard with the contractor now to begin delivery there. Pavement maintenance is important to us, and we're excited about additional dollars that are coming through Measure B and through state gas tax dollars that will help us to increase our PCI for our pavement. Safe routes to school projects are a priority that you identified for us and pushed forward through the January priority setting session, and those will be exciting projects that we'll get to design and deliver to you. And then to round it out, some projects at parks. So we would need to do an upgrade at the Gatos park restroom. We still have a Bachman Park project that we want to do some community outreach and form the structure of that project, both on potential pathway improvements from a accessibility perspective and improvements to the park should they be necessary or desired by the residents. And then a storm drain master plan as we start to look at how we address the state mandated requirements of our water permits. So we have to manage the water that leaves the town streets and goes into the creeks. And having a storm drain master plan will help us to identify the deficiencies within that and begin to address those deficiencies. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. We'll turn it back to the town manager for wrap up.
Thank you. On page A2 of the proposed operating budget, there's a series of recommendations for the use of the excess funding from fiscal year 15-16, as well as the excess that was broken free because of the favorable bid that we received for the Almond Grove. So the chart up on the slide replicates the table that is on page A2 in your binder. The first line item are general fund operating expenses. We are proposing approximately $450,000 of use. This includes the town council priorities that were identified in January, such as the increased tree maintenance services, as well as the high-low tree maintenance services of $25,000. It also includes various mandates. The second item is the Transportation and Traffic Mobility Manager at about $200,000. This is a position that we've discussed in prior meetings, and it sets the town very favorably in terms of being able to capture its share of the Measure B proposals. We are looking to transfer about 1.8 to the capital projects. And again, this reflects the council's priorities, including the $25,000 to the Gateway Art Project and other items that were identified in the January timeframe. Staff is recommending that we meet our required 25% of operating for our budget stabilization and catastrophic reserves. So that means we need to add about $600,000 to those reserves. We are also recommending, as Director Conway mentioned, an additional $1 million to deal with our unfunded liabilities. Next, we are recommending that we put aside about $700,000 for our future capital projects, and this would allow us to have some matching funds for those Measure B projects as well as for other needs. For example, for the next fiscal year, council may say, let's augment a little bit more on street repair to improve our pavement condition index. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility for future capital programming. And then lastly, we are recommending that we replenish partially our facilities fund and our equipment replacement fund to the tune of about $300,000 each. We used each of these funds in creating the Almond Grove Reserve. So now that we have some savings, thanks to the Almond Grove project, we'd like to replenish those two funds so that we're able to handle town business such as maintaining our facilities and making sure that the staff have safe equipment as we move forward. So with that, I'd like to first thank and appreciate all of the hard staff work that went into preparing the budget documents that are before you this evening. Staff from all of our departments are present to answer your questions and respond to your direction this evening. I also want to point out that yesterday we issued an addendum with public comments, and today we issued a desk item responding to questions from a council member. So with that, we look forward to the public testimony, your comments and questions, and direction as we move forward, looking towards our 17-18 budget year. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to convey our thanks as well. It's, as I said, if there's one document that the resident can read, this really is it. And I thank you for all the hard work that everyone has put into it. So council members, I open up to initial questions of staff. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Sack. And thank you for the report. Very, very thorough. One thing I've learned, though, there's so many numbers in here that when I think I know why a number looks like it does, there's often something I don't know. So I'd like to start asking a few high-level questions. If I could start on page C15 with salaries and benefits. If I look at the 16-17 estimated, it jumps from almost 23 million to 27 million proposed for salaries and benefits. And I realize we always overestimate our costs and underestimate our revenue. So if I actually compare it to the adopted one from last year, which probably had its overestimates also, it's still a jump of $2 million. So we've talked about increasing our FTEs by 2.32, which shouldn't be enough to get us that $2 million increase. I see that we've recategorized several positions that look like they've gone from less expensive positions to more expensive positions, so I'm guessing some of that comes from there. We've done a 2.5% increase in salaries across the board, so I'm guessing that's adding to it. Is that so? Let me stop there and how do you respond? Am I on track? What am I missing?
Councilmember Rennie, you're very much on track. Would like to point out orienting ourselves to page C15. The estimated is estimated actual, so that's our actual forecast of this fiscal year's salary and benefit actual costs. So remember that we budget at top step across the board, except in our public safety department. So that's one reason why you're going to see a lower number in that particular column. Also in 2016-17, the budget that we passed last May did not include any provisions for raises. So that number would be 2.5% higher had we known that we would have a successful negotiation. So the adopted amount shown on that column did not include any raises. So had it had a 2.5% raise, it would have been significantly higher. Then you would have seen another 2.5% for because we had a 2-year contract across most of our agreements. So you were right on track on that. In terms of those comparisons. We did have a few new positions also. We had to add the transportation and mobility manager, which you saw was a new add, and some new classifications that did. But you were on track on most of those.
So if I could follow on this very specific question, it also includes increases in benefit costs.
Correct.
Is there any CalPERS increases that are
CalPERS
also
increase
included
also.
Here?
Yes.
Okay.
Beyond what we had, in the adopted budget, because the discount rate was passed this January, and also there had been some changes to some of the actuarial assumptions that CalPERS uses when they establish the rates for that'd be fiscal year 17-18.
And if I could then ask sort of a related question, if I switch us to page D123, which is the police department budget, same thing, salaries and benefits. If I look at the 16-17 adopted to this year's proposed, it's a jump of $1 million. When I look on the pages a few before where it talks about FTE switches. There's no increase in staffing in the police department. You just change somebody from a CSO to a human resources person. That doesn't sound like an increase there. So the $1 million, is it all benefits and salary increase?
There is one position that was transferred from the town manager's budget to the police budget. So you will see a net add on page D124 with respect to the community outreach coordinator. That position historically had been funded out of the non-departmental fund, which is a town-wide fund administered by the town manager's office. That individual provides services to the police department. So it really makes sense to have that position budgeted in the department within which the work is actually conducted. So that was an add. And then I'll turn it back to Director Conway for the other reasons for the increase.
If I could just question that a little bit. So on page C44, it shows the pluses and adds. So for the police department, it has delete one, add one. So that's why I didn't, shouldn't it say add one there then? Because you just told me you added something to their budget.
It's a transfer within the town, so there's no net change to the town-wide budget. It's really just transferring it from one program in the town manager's office to the police department. So when you start looking at the department-wide numbers, you are going to see a net add of one position. But if you look at the total town budget, there's no change in terms of the dollar expended for that individual.
Okay.
Other than,
you couldn't show it here because you're kind of trying to show the department by itself, and that's really
correct.
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Yeah, and Councilmember Rooney, you're correct in that the police budget that was in 16-17 also, we completed negotiations with our Police Officers Association, so there were no raises in 16-17 built into those numbers, which is one of the unfortunate things when we don't put salary and benefit increases or salary increases, negotiated salary, because we don't know what they are and haven't agreed to anything. It does make it look like a big jump from year to year, but in fact, it's really a little misleading there because the 16-17 number would be higher if the raise was built in, and then the change would not appear to be of that magnitude.
Okay, so I think I understand those number increases. I will yield the floor. That's all for this particular type of question.
Okay. Council members, any further questions? Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Conway, I'm going to have you go to page C40. And this is the operating budget, not the CIP.
Yes.
At the bottom of the page, and so that my question makes sense, can you tell us what that graph or chart at the bottom of the page depicts, and also can you put a number, money number, to fiscal year 17-18 versus fiscal year 22-23?
Yes, I can, Councilmember Spector. So the pictorial graph that we show on page C40 has two trend lines representing two types of employees that receive pensions for the town. One is classified as miscellaneous. That would be the non-sworn people who provide services, and then the sworn are the other solid blue line, and they have their own separate pension plan. And what this graph represents is the dollar or the rates of employer contribution on every dollar of salary that we expect and have built into our 5-year plan for the next 5 years. And we have used the CalPERS tool based on their lowering of discount rates to determine these rates. Those rates were built in. I can remember from some research I did, I believe that our current cost for the lower line for miscellaneous, I believe, was $3 million, approximately going to $4.6 million for our miscellaneous plan per year in the 5th year. And then our safety plan was right in 17-18 will be approximately $2 million And with the PERS changes to our employer contribution rates as they're proposed right now, that will increase to $3.3 million in year 22-23. And those amounts have been built into our 5-year plan.
Thank you. And just confirming that this does not, this is independent of our OPEB obligations.
Correct.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I'll ask another question. Page C37 gives us a picture of our FTEs by department, and what I'm particularly interested in is the hour. I guess what I'm trying to understand is there seems to be lots of one-time funding wording going into this year, and a lot of it seems, well, there seems to be a bunch around staffing also. So in the graph here, you have blue and purple, and I guess the purple is hourly employee staff converted to FTEs. Is that our one-time funding? What I'm really thinking about is, so our governor keeps making us think about the next recession that's coming, his budget plans for it. So I'm thinking, how quickly can we take things out of our budget if something comes quickly? And there's down at hourly 12 FTEs. Could we get rid of all 12 FTEs if we went into a recession easily?
I think one of the advantages of the hourly employee is that they are scalable, and that is a real advantage for the town. So yes, we have increased utilization of as workload requires. We have some flexibility, more flexibility with our hourly employees, so we can scale if the economy were to have go into recession. We could more quickly scale our temporary support. Service levels would have to be adjusted and expectations adjusted, but we have ramped up some hourly work across the departments to meet some more of one-time urgent needs, but those could be scaled back at any time.
Could you or the town manager address more what are these one-time funding that's going into this year? Summarize that a little bit more.
So just by way of example, so for example, we have a lot more cases being handled by our police department, and that means that our records staff needs to do all of the processing of the paperwork associated with the cases and getting it to the DA's office in a timely manner. We also have increased public records requests, so we need to be able to meet the state mandates, and we are not able to recover all of our costs by law. So we need to create, in order to meet that mandate, then we need to increase temporary hours to meet those needs. As was stated earlier, we also want to make sure that we're able to flexibly address service levels. So our library department does use a fair amount of temporary hours to meet service level needs and be able to flexibly staff accordingly. So we've used the hourly to make sure that we're able to maintain our high service levels, but the advantage of doing that is that we're not committing a permanent position to our base budget. And so this has been a mechanism, and if we do hit a recession, then we would be very aware of what are all of the different options. So we would probably come back with a package of proposals for council consideration, not just looking at our hourly workforce, but also looking at any vacant positions that might be eligible for elimination, decreases in service levels, et cetera. So a recession would be a big deal. I think in the past, this town has been able to weather it very well, but we're very cautious in terms of not adding a lot of FTE to this budget, knowing that a recession before the end of this decade is very likely.
So if I could follow up a little bit on that. So I see in here records requests, public counter activity. I think I saw somewhere, I'm not seeing it right now, increased investigations. Is there more criminal activity right now that because we're calling it one time, is this like a catch up? There's a backlog of filing or requests, and then we can catch up and then we won't need it next year? Why is this temporary?
Well, first of all, state law is changing. So the mandates in terms of what we need to report are increasing. So by having some flexible temporary hours this year, we're going to be able to determine what kind of staffing is needed to meet those mandates. So we're going to increase our temporary hours. If we're able to find efficient ways to meet all of those new mandates, then we won't need to increase hours in the future. I do want to give the opportunity to our interim chief to perhaps make any additional comments, but I think we're trying to adjust to new laws without overcommitting the town to permanent resources.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mike D'Antonio, Interim Chief of Police. So both those are really good questions, and I think some of it's already been said, but to reiterate, when we looked at how we could continue our service delivery instead of adding a full-time employee, in other words, adding an FTE to our budget, we looked at ways that we could still increase services or maintain services, and that's why we requested the temporary hours. So when we look back at for your question about investigations, that ask for temporary hours is actually related to evidence. And so what we're seeing is an increase in evidence cases. At the same time, we have one evidence technician that is responsible for the intake of all new evidence and also the disposition of old evidence. And the disposition of older evidence is actually where it takes some additional work. There's certain court orders that have to be done. We have to make the proper notifications before we can actually dispose of that evidence. And quite frankly, we're behind. So there's evidence that needs to be disposed and cleared out. We're starting to run out of room, and that's how much evidence we have. So we believe with this one-time ask, and we do look at it as a one-time ask, to get us caught up with those evidence dispositions, and then that evidence technician can focus completely on new evidence and bringing intake of property evidence into our system. In regards to the records, town manager did mention that position would be a records specialist. And one of the things we look at there is we're just having an increase in not only cases, but our citations. Part of Proposition 47 changed the requirements for some felony arrests to misdemeanors, and actually not some, but quite a bit. So all narcotics arrest, minor possession are now misdemeanors, and now those have turned into citations. And so we're seeing an increased workload in the citations and the case management or the case processing. And so what's happened is we've actually had our records manager stepping in to help process cases and to help and even counter at times. And so one of the projects that I would like her to do this year is to start working on AB 953. And although some jurisdictions have already had to comply with AB 953 because of their size, we have a few more years to actually comply with AB 953. And what it is, it's a racial profiling act. And so what we're going to have to do as a department in the next few years is understand how we're going to be able to capture that information. So for every stop we make, we're going to have to be able to report the time, the date, the perceived race of the person we stopped, the reason for the stop, and the result of the stop. And so that's going to be a big project for us as we're moving forward. And what we're hoping to do is looking at our CAD and RMS systems to be able to help us actually capture that information from the officers. But that's something that I don't want to wait 3 years. We have 3 years before we have to do it. A best practice, and we've always done this at the Los Gatos Monte Sereno Police Department, has really been ahead of mandates. So in other words, like body-worn cameras or in-camera videos, we've been early adopters on that. So part of this money for the records specialist is what I want to do is have our records manager really be able to have time this year to set us up in the best way we can for the next few years, not only to be able to meet those mandates, but to really understand what the costs of those are going to be as well.
Thank you. That's good, very thorough answer. Let me ask one small question, just kind of curious when I was reading this, and I know that our police department's been solving jewelry heists and so forth where they've had to work across states and other jurisdictions. So it's sounded to me like we've got a lot more collaboration outside of our own department. So is some of this evidence request, is it because other departments are asking us for information to also solve crimes, or is it just mostly our own internal work?
So it is our own internal work. What we're seeing in addition to our normal discovery requests is that we're getting more requests for our body-worn camera video, our in-car camera video, and other electronic evidence. And that's just taking us more time to be able to produce. So those initial discovery requests, now everyone that comes from either a defense attorney or the DA's office is requesting all video and electronic evidence that is associated with that case. And so that's just changed, and we have just a lot more video evidence that we have to produce.
Okay. Just the summary is we've got more mandates effectively that we've got to pay for somehow.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Conway, I'm going to circle back to C40. I want to see if my math is right. Based upon what you said, I was writing it down. So for 2017-18, you gave me the numbers 2 and 3, so I said that was $5 million that we would be spending for 17-18. Is that correct? And then for 22-23, for the end of our 5-year time frame, it was 3.3 and 4.6, so we're going to go up to 7.9. Is that correct?
If your math is correct, that is correct, and I believe that is correct. How's that for hedging my bets?
That's right. You're going to throw it back at me.
I'm only an accountant, but I'm an aging accountant. But yeah, I believe you're right.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Vice Mayor?
If I could ask one more. This time I'd like to ask a question of Parks and Public Works. And we haven't talked about this at all, so I'm curious. Then AB1 was just passed, and then Measure B followed along the same requirements. My understanding is for us to get AB1 funds and to get to Measure B funds for street repair, we have to spend at least the average of FY10 through FY12. What is that number? Since this is brand new, we haven't even talked about. Is that a hard number for us to meet in the future?
The answer, so the quick answer is we don't have enough information yet. We don't know if that needs to be general fund dollars or if it's going to be more broadly defined to incorporate other dollars. So we're working through our work on VTA to identify what the requirements for Measure B will be, and that will be determined by the board by the end of this fiscal year, and we'll have some more clarity at that point. Other than that, we haven't done the math on what it is for those 3 years. Ultimately, what we're hoping is that they actually offset each other, so that the ABSB1 dollars will offset the match for the Measure B dollars, and we'll be at a wash from that perspective.
Okay, so I'll be curious when we figure out the numbers, because FY10 through 12 were recession years. I would expect they to be easy to do, but you never know how we spent our money.
And some of it is the difference between ongoing commitments, so our GFAR commitments versus a one-time commitment. So when did we start to budget one-time expenses, and do those count in the overall pavement maintenance? So we're sort of treading lightly and working to define that as best we can to benefit the town.
Thank you.
Council members, any further questions? I have 2 quick ones, and then I'll open to public testimony. Just the discussion on one-time funding and mandates. I appreciate the idea of planning ahead, such as this AB 953. Other than AB 953 and the upcoming storm drain master plan, are there any other mandates that we are anticipating that we may want to set aside funds for, especially with the 5-year projections not as high as we would like them to be? So it's a very general question.
Well, certainly we're continuing to anticipate the CalPERS increased rates. So I think by having our CalPERS reserve and our and the other strategies that our committee is starting to evaluate will position the town to be more flexible. And if we're successful in setting up the 115 trust for our pensions, hopefully we'll be able to grow our money and be able to adapt to any additional changes that might be coming from CalPERS. And we're understanding that the state will be continuing to struggle with this issue, so there will be additional impact to our town, even beyond the assumptions that we've made tonight. The legal mandates continue to get stricter for environmental protection. And so as we look at our sustainability plan and making sure that we are meeting our own needs on our town properties, the urban runoff is a very real issue for us. And so we are going to be looking at how we can meet those unfunded mandates. And I just look to the other directors if there's any other known items.
There may be some changes, for instance, in CEQA that we'll need to figure out a game plan on how we comply with that. And I would anticipate there would be some staff work and some consultant work, one-time cost probably, to comply with, for instance, the switch to vehicle miles traveled, that kind of a thing.
And so then the follow-up question to the town manager is, do we have enough set aside in our operating so that if there are anticipated issues that we need to address this upcoming fiscal year, we have the capacity and bandwidth to do so?
Yes, we have used several flexible tools. For example, within the non-departmental and within the town manager's office, we have a contingency fund that is at my discretion to spend. So for example, if we find that we need to accelerate our examination of the change to the California Environmental Quality Act, and we need our own expert to help us with the new traffic reporting, we could use a portion of that manager's contingency budget to offset that. Similarly, if there's a special project or the need to get additional appraisal services or something else, we have some money that again can be flexibly allocated.
Okay. Without, I think what I'll do now is I'll open public testimony. As I mentioned, do welcome anyone who would like to speak to any of the items in our budget or as well as our capital program. At this time, I have 3 cards. First is Angelia Dorner.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. First off, following on to Mr. Rennie's comments about the continuity of maintenance balances on our street work in connection with Measure B, I think it's really important right now to go ahead and look at specific delineation of the stuff that's included in street projects as well as the sidewalk projects, et cetera, to clearly document things that aren't really street maintenance. For instance, the green bike lanes, which are incorporated in the street project, really should be separated out and shown against the implementation or improvements for green bike lanes. Same as certain sidewalks that are in the master plan should really be shown as something over in the master plan, as well as a type of traffic impact fees utilization like with Albright, et cetera. In addition, there are certain things in the, a lot of times there are ramps and other things that are included in the street projects. It should probably be, again, delineated outside of these numbers so that someone does not think that we're spending all that stuff just on street maintenance. So anyway, what I'd like to do is just walk you through some questions. I really have just a nonsensical thing about some of these staff costs that are allocated to certain projects. First off, I want to make sure that the fund left over before, if you decide to take anything out for the Almond Grove stuff, includes the remaining amounts for Wilsingham as well as the new materials testing contract, Wilsingham had $111,000 that you previously approved for assistance during the construction period, if requested. So I want to make sure that you focus on that. That's $37,000 a year, total of $111,000 over the 3-year period. Materials testing, that was something that Matt touched on, but we did that with our own staff last year. Now we have a consultant doing that for us. And so I would have expected that that would have replaced some of these staff utilization costs that we incurred on the first one. Let's look at the staff costs for the Almond Grove. The staff costs allocated was $990,000 divided by 3 years comes up with $330,000 per year. Now, the concentration of that is all in the summer and fall months. So I just went and showed an allocation of 20% in the first part for things of getting ready for the project, closing out invoices, et cetera. And the 80% is the largest component. But if you look at those costs and say that really only covers half of a year in reality, times 2 to annualize it for what the full FTE cost of that would be. Let's take a similar approach for the street construction. These are the street staff costs that are included in the street construction. Some will have to be done with design and picking the streets, et cetera, but the majority of it is all concentrated in the summer and fall. If you look at annualizing those staff costs, that's $582. Same thing on the sidewalk type of information, and then we come down with some grand totals. I want you to focus on the Measure B manager salary that you recently approved. The range was $112,000 to $140,000. However, the CIP uses $217,000, which would indicate a 55% benefit load. Seems awfully high, and that's using the $140,000. If you just take that as a reference, because that's supposed to be a very experienced manager, you look at that amount and you look at the annualized salary components just for these 3 projects, not all the other projects that are going on. But if you just look at these here and you say, well, what's the equivalent of a Measure B type person that those kinds of allocated staff costs would represent? And we would be basically saying that we had an equivalent of 6 full-time annual salaries of someone at that Measure B level doing the work on these 3 projects for 6 months out of the year. Just does not really make sense. I'm going to be sending this a better analysis that I can't cover in 3 minutes as well, but it just seems like it's way overloaded. I can't understand how we are able to get to this point of staff allocations. And I have not been asking for anything with public records until you guys got to this point in May.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dorner. Council members, any questions? Yes, Council Member Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question of staff. Going to Ms. Dorner's evaluation of how much the staff costs are projected to be on these various CIP projects, and I think she was focusing on Almond Grove. This was a question I had earlier in the week. In my experience, the staff costs for a CIP project came from the operating budget. But this year, specifically with Almond Grove, I see it coming from the capital improvement project budget. Is that true? And well, let's start with, is that true? And then I will go on to possibly if it applies to the numbers Ms. Dorner is using.
Thank you for the question. So as I covered in the presentation on the CIP, we have 4 FTEs that are dedicated to project delivery. So we allocate those positions first throughout our capital program. When we run into a demand for program management, for project management that exceeds what we have within our staffing, we look for additional help to make that happen, and that's why you're seeing us start to identify the costs of staffing associated with the project, so that as these projects accumulate over time and we exceed our ability to deliver projects, we can make that decision on whether we need to pull funding from projects to fund delivery of those projects. So that's the transparency element of showing what the costs are in on Almond Grove, projects like Almond Grove. In terms of Almond Grove, we had up until recently 5 staff members working on that. So beyond what we have in-house, we've used temporary staffing to do that. The temporary staffing, as I mentioned, allows us to flex. So much as the police department's using it for one-time costs, we're able to use it for one-time costs and to ramp up and then to ramp down without ongoing obligations and without the ongoing costs such as pension costs and OPEB costs that you would typically see on a full-time position.
Isn't it different from the police department in that you're not using the operating budget funding, you're using, at least in the circumstances you're describing, the capital improvement budget?
It is different from that perspective. Ultimately, the dollars all roll up to one source, and we happen to be pulling from GFAR. For these funds, one-time funds can come from various locations and typically comes from the previous year's year-end fund balance, which is essentially the same source of funds. So when you're looking at the dollar allocations, there's a limited, a finite amount of money. We're certainly open to looking at project delivery that scales projects over a longer time frame, so we could work within that 4 FTEs that we have for project delivery, but we wouldn't be able to deliver the projects at the same rate. So we'd have to stretch them out over a much longer period of time to be able to deliver those. Our recommendation is that we continue to fund projects first out of our operating budget, and then to supplement that with the capital budget to make those projects come to fruition.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Ms. Dorner?
It's a follow-up to Mr. Morley, not to Ms. Dorner.
Okay. Real quick, any questions of Ms. Dorner? Okay, thank you, Ms. Dorner. And then go ahead, Councilmember Johnson.
Following up on Councilwoman Spector's question, I just wanted to understand, as part of your presentation, Mr. Morley, you included a portion that was indicating that an experiment, if you will, was pointing out or costing out staff time for projects. So I understand that there are occasions where you use temporary staffing to deliver a project, but what I'm trying to understand is, in what I understood you to say is basically you're calling out something to us that we didn't necessarily see before. So it's not a cost differential. We're not adding cost. You're just now telling us something that was always included. So there's no additional money, the temporary staffing aside. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I can, since we're following up on questions, so I assume the loading that got you to 217 includes more than benefits. You included some loading for they got to have an office. They got some use of power, some use of IT, some use of HR. What are the other kinds of things that get loaded in there?
Finance may be able to handle most of it, but that does not include any of the hard cost, the other hard costs like office space. It includes the cost of the employee. At Top Step, we fund it. We budget at Top Step, and the other elements of an employee. And I'll let I think Gitte may want to elaborate on that.
Yes, every position that we are costing out would have the base salary that if you see an advertisement for a position, the public would see that position. But in addition, we have to add the corpus rate that Barbara Spector just pointed out, the 40% or 20% in certain position. Also, we have to charge for insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and also MIS time. And those positions are loaded, and also health benefits. So this is how we calculate the positions. And the 217,000 would be a fully loaded Top Step position.
So Top Step meaning it's the 140, but if we happen to hire for 130, we'll have some savings from the 217. Yes. Okay, thank you.
My follow-up now to all these follow-ups. So on page C17 of the operating budget, if we're looking at general fund expenditures by department, so for Parks and Public Works, the 18.8, does that include the 4 FTEs that are, I guess, coming from the capital improvement program?
Yes, it does.
So this encompasses all of the funds, regardless, all of the expenditures, regardless of which route it's going through. Am I explaining that correctly?
I believe the answer to that is yes.
Okay. Okay. So no further questions on that. We'll continue public testimony. Ali Khani? Okay. Ed Lozowicki?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name's Ed Lozowicki. I've been here before. My family and I have been residents of Los Gatos for 36 years, 34 of them on Rosalie Court. Backyard of our home abuts the infamous eucalyptus trees on Hilo Road. So I'm here to speak in support of the proposal from the staff to allocate $25,000 in the operating budget to support heavy pruning and reducing of limbs and something called root collar work, which I'm not really sure of what that is, for these trees in the new fiscal year. And appreciate the council and staff's attention to the need for these trees. It's in attachment 1J in the public agenda that was on the website. I'd also want to point out that both I and my neighbors who are concerned about these trees look on this pruning work, which is a one-time effort, as a temporary measure, if you will, an effort to see if the pruning reduces the risk of falling limbs and injury to people by these trees. It's not the permanent solution. In our view, the permanent solution is to replace these trees with a benign species of tree that doesn't have the inherent failure characteristics of eucalyptus, which we documented in prior submissions to the council. The reason I say that is demonstrated by the recent track record. Since January, there have been at least 4 major collapses of eucalyptus in the Bay Area. January 22 in Lafayette, several cars crushed in a restaurant parking lot. January 25th in Castro Valley, a woman was trapped in her car when a falling eucalyptus fell on it. February 17th in Soquel, car parked in a person's home was crushed by a eucalyptus tree. February 17th in Fremont, a tree fell across Mallory Road and wiped out an Acura parked on that main street in Fremont. So these trees continue to be a danger. And the long-term answer really is to replace them. So I appreciate your attention. And I'm hopeful that the pruning work will eliminate the need for that, but I'm pretty skeptical. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Oh, I want to add one thing. My understanding is that 25,000 contemplates the scope of work that was in the independent arborist report that was submitted to staff, which is well defined, and we want to encourage the town to award on that basis.
Okay, so that specific question, I guess I'll have Director Morley follow up offline, but in terms of budget, because I don't want to get into the specific contracts at this time, but in terms of budgets, that is reflected in this document. So, any questions, though, of the budget itself, not the contract? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have another card, a group card for Lisa Oakley, Tyler Taylor, and Josh Celo.
Good evening, Mayor Syak and council members. My name is Lisa Oakley. I'm from the Saratoga Area Senior Coordinating Council. This is Tyler Taylor, also from SASE, and Josh Cello from West Valley Community Services. First, I want to thank you for your consideration for the Senior Transportation Pilot Program. It's the one-year program being proposed by the county as a triad of funding from the county, VTA, and the 5 West Valley cities. And I also want to thank you for your consideration of us being able to work with your staff over the last month in regards to the transportation program. We're here to support the transportation program, which consists of a concierge door-to-door transportation service for adults over the age of 60 within a service area of the 5 West Valley cities. The participants will be able to attend regular doctor's visits for preventative care, as well as chronic disease management, socialization to parks and recreation departments, senior centers, shopping centers, be able to take care of their daily needs. It's a turnkey system that's based on an established, successful long-term program in Palo Alto over 14 years. And this program will allow, we're going to have software tracking for the program over the year so that each of the entities will be able to look at the data associated with the program and its success. In addition, an important aspect will be subsidized rides offered to those with financial need. And we suspect that it is such a small part of the budget that as we reviewed the budget, we weren't able to actually find the location of it within the budget. But we suspect that it's not a separate line item due to the size of it. We're really excited about this transportation program. As you know, seniors don't necessarily have the mobility to get to a bus stop. So having that door-to-door transportation will be really well received, I think, by them. So we're looking forward to seeing how this one-year pilot program proceeds, and we really appreciate your support and consideration of the program.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me follow up on what they were saying and ask staff, where in the budget can we find the concierge line item?
On page D61, under non-departmental, which is in the town manager's office, we've identified $17,000 for the potential participation in the pilot, and we're looking forward to bringing a specific agreement to the councils for consideration in the August timeframe.
Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. And I have no other speaker cards. Would anyone else like to speak on any item contained in either documents before us? Seeing none, I close public testimony and look to council for further questions of staff and or comments. Councilmember Jensen.
I just had a procedural question, if I might. I'm just wondering what kind of motion is staff looking for or hoping for just procedurally?
We don't need a motion tonight. We typically listen to your direction, and specifically we're interested to know if the recommendations on page A2 align with your priorities for the future, for the next fiscal year. And what we typically do then is come back with the formal resolution to adopt the budget for our June 6th hearing.
Given that, can I follow up then? So for this council member, I am, thank you to all of you who are present, all of you who worked on this. I know that budget process and development is extremely difficult and time consuming, and I know that you started a long time ago, so thank you for being here tonight to see the fruition. I, for one, am completely comfortable with what's recommended on A2. Thank you for incorporating those things that we put into our January strategy session that I see here. So I would ask for no modifications and would be pleased to support the recommendations going forward.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. It reminds me of one more question. So on page A2, the CalPERS OPEB reserve, you're recommending $1 million. Council direction in the past was to be $300,000 a year into that. So is the million in addition to $300,000, or is it instead of?
That's an additional $1 million, so it'd be $1.3 million next year.
Okay,
likely.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead. I agree with Councilmember Jensen that I can't really find any changes. I mean, I see the increases in costs and so forth, and I wish they weren't there. I'm not sure how we would really get rid of them. This year we can afford to do some of these one-time funding items, and I think I'm confident we can back them out in coming years if need be.
Any further comments from other council members? Yes, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This year is a very interesting year in doing the budget because it's unlike, for me, any other year that we've had so far. We have 2.9 million that has we've been able to draw from the Almond Grove. We have a 2.6 million GFAR amount for a total of 5.5 million. I mean, I've never sat up here and had 5.5 million to decide, what we're going to spend on. On the other hand, we have unfunded liabilities, and unfunded liabilities increasing more than in total amount than I've ever had to address up here. And we're always told by staff that, and by the community, that we don't have enough funds for our capital improvement projects. So on the one hand, I like the fact that we have to decide how to spend $5.5 million. On the other hand, I personally would prioritize the unfunded liabilities at the top of my list. I would prioritize replenishing the reserves that we have reduced or depleted because those are mandates. So I would do that. And then I would, if we had extra money, I would use it on the capital improvement projects because we've been told repeatedly that our pavement numbers are too low, that, our PCIs are too low. So we now have the opportunity to what I call prioritize and focus. I appreciate what staff has done. This is a monumental amount of work, and it is very well done. But if I were taking the monies personally and allocating them, as I said, I would prioritize and focus. I would take that $5.5 million and I would focus on pensions. I would focus on our underfunded reserves, and then I would go to the priority capital improvement projects. A lot of that is covered in the staff's proposed list, but it also has other things. And I would not do the other things until I addressed the priority items. And also, in the past, the GFAR monies, the monies that come from our budget savings each year, like if we budgeted 35 million and we only spent 33 million, we would put 2 million into our GFAR, into our capital improvement program. And that has historically been reported as inadequate. But this year, as we were discussing, some of those GFAR monies are allocated to and possibly could be used for staff expenses, what I would normally call an operating budget expense. I would keep the capital improvement in the capital improvement arena. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any further comments? I'll just make a couple of general comments. As I said, this is a reflection of the priorities we had discussed in January. And one of the questions, as an example, that I had asked the town manager was community emergency response. Over the winter, we knew just the panic over storms of how will the police get to me if X, Y, and Z occurs, or during summer beach traffic, what's going to happen when I can't get out of my driveway? And so my question to our town managers, how do you translate that priority that we discussed in January to the actual operating budget before us? And the response, and I'll let the town manager speak for how that is so much is built in within the operating budget itself that isn't spelled out in a line item, but is in there, and the staff is comfortable in meeting those obligations and that high quality service that we come to expect. But that's like an example that I asked her to actually show me how it's reflected in the budget. Would you like to expand on that? Manager
Certainly.
Parvetti?
And this is actually one of the advantages of really making sure that the departments are focusing on their core services. For example, making sure that police is really focusing on the core service of public safety and having our community outreach coordinator relieved of the responsibility of handling special event permits and having that responsibility come to the town manager's office so she can then work with our volunteer community around increasing more people who are interested in serving in an emergency response. I'm also pleased with our new assistant town manager that we're going to be able to do a lot more around emergency preparedness in coordination with County Fire and our own police department. So really this budget acknowledges how can Parks and Public Works focus on its core services, how can our police department focus on emergency preparedness as well as general public safety, and how then can the town manager's office relieve those departments of those extraneous responsibilities and have them better focused around what a town manager's office does with respect to economic vitality, events, and other services.
And one final question. There were several specifics that were brought up, such as High-Low Road contract and the West Valley Community Service. So in this budget, we're setting aside funds for those purposes, but those specific contracts will come back when appropriate, and at that time, the specific commitment to those services will be made. Is that correct?
That's correct. And some of them will be under your manager's authority. So, for example, a contract of less than $50,000 is something that you've allowed for your manager for me to approve on your behalf. So we'll be handling those administratively. Items such as the senior transportation, while it's only $17,000 only, we feel that because this is a pilot, we would like to have a council discussion about that before we sign the agreement to make sure that it is a pilot that meets your needs. So when there is a policy issue at hand, we would certainly bring those back for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. A question and some more comments. So addressing our unfunded liability is also important for me, and I've been working on the Finance Committee on that, and we're thinking of ways to change some of our investments, or maybe, if possible, use some of our lowly invested, if I could use that term, funds to help that. But in this year, in the 16-17 year, how much did we put into unfunded liabilities? I'm thinking it's $2 million something, but we did it in steps, so I've lost track.
Council approved a $1 million payment, plus we had already budgeted a $1.6 million, so a total of $2.6 million is already going into pre-funding this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
You're
so
welcome.
if I could just finish comments with that. So, you know, we made a start this year. We've got another $1 million directly going into that. If you all recall, we pulled money out of a bunch of the reserves. So of this $5 million, we're putting $1.2 million back into reserves that we had depleted. So we're not really spending that money. We're putting it in reserves that may actually be able to be used to, if borrow against it, and invest at a higher rate and make money for our unfunded pension liability. So I don't see any problem with the way that 1.2 is going. We talked about this already, that the money for the traffic and mobility manager enables us to get Measure B capital funds into the town to address most likely roads and pedestrian and bike kinds of improvements. So that seems like a wise investment. It was mentioned that our PCI index is low, and getting that up is important. So that that sort of goes along those lines. And then the capital budgets, the $1.8 million, we allocated larger amounts for getting our PCI up this year. Maybe another question at this point, the 1.8 must include some Measure B funds and SB1 funds in it, or not?
No, I don't believe it does. You know, we're looking at probably in the out years for Measure B. I think all we've looked for is the formulaic numbers that we already have some certainty around.
That's for the roads then, so that's what I was referring to, the formulaic roads, all we do, we have to meet the prerequisite, so that's already included in that 1.8, correct?
No, the 1.8 is our money, is the town's money. So there would be additional funds coming from, I think it was 500, if I remember correctly.
A little bit less than 500,
yeah,
I think,
something like that, coming from the Measure B.
And then there might be something from SB1 also towards
right. So
road.
there will be future money that will be coming in. So if you want, we can look at those capital pages and we identify the source of the different funds.
So in summary, really what it is we've got, we've also made a pretty good attack on the roads with what we added here plus what is coming from those other sources. So we also, so if I can just sort of finish my comments on the summary of this is, I see 700,000 we're also going to put in a capital reserve, which I think is a smart idea because as we look forward, we're not planning budget surpluses after this year, so we may have more trouble finding for money for capital in the future, so it makes sense to put that aside. So, the only thing in here that maybe you would reduce is the general fund one-time use, which I kind of addressed earlier, and it's really, it's not a huge percentage of it. So again, I'm still not thinking I would want to change this allocation much.
Okay. Any further comments? Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Sayoc. Just want to know what is the status of the tennis court resurfacing? Has that been done yet?
Thank you. The tennis court resurfacing is being programmed now with a contractor. We would expect the work to occur within the next 6 weeks.
Will that occur in Blossom Hill Park?
It will, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Well, then I think we've considered the budget. And again, thank you very much. And if there is no other items that need to be addressed, I think we are completed with this issue and meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.